Character design is rather difficult and can sometimes be very frustrating, especially when looking at drawings for games or on social media. So how can we achieve similar results? This video is a short introduction to character design, and in it we will go over what defines character design, what makes good character design, researching for our design, and which fundamentals we need to actually draw the design. What is character design? Character design is more than just drawing cool looking outfits. It is a way for artists to tell a story through the characters. A story grounds our characters and sets certain limits that we can orientate ourselves on when creating the character. The story behind our character doesn't need to be super elaborate or refined. For us, the story needs to simply exist as a concept which we can use to guide us during the design process. What makes good character design? Obviously, a good character design needs to be unique. Not necessarily. My advice, worry less about uniqueness and more about execution. Sure, if you have an interesting and unique idea, go for it, but remember that you shouldn't be afraid to do things that have been done before. No idea is truly original, and if we only focus on creating something completely new, we will end up never creating at all. Also, keep in mind that no two drawings look alike. We all have our own way of visualizing our creativity, so don't get discouraged. Now that we established that a good character design doesn't need a unique idea behind it, what does it need? What makes a character stand out? That would be their silhouette, shape, language, and color. With this knowledge, it should be easy to make a good character, right? That is certainly possible, but if we just start drawing, we will most likely end up without any direction. So where do we get that direction from? How can we plan our design? This is where research comes into play. When drawing any character, we should do some research into our design. If, for example, our character is wearing armor, we should look at how armor functions and how we can translate that into our drawing. Using references works differently for everyone. I personally like to use reference as I go. I gather some reference before I start a drawing and then add more as needed. But one thing that is the same for everyone is that when using references, it builds our visual library. If you have some experience with character design, this should sound familiar to you. But if you never heard of it, don't worry. It simply means that when we use references and understand them, we save that information and can replicate it later without needing to reference it again. We now understand what we want to draw, but we still need to figure out how to draw it. To actually visualize our design, we need to apply practical skills. To enhance our practical skills, we need to understand some art fundamentals that are very important in character design. The first one that probably comes to mind would be anatomy. Anatomy is an important fundamental for character design, because if we don't understand how the human body looks and functions, we can't effectively stylize our characters. To start learning anatomy, we need a solid foundation. We need to learn how to construct a human body. To construct a human body, we need to focus on proportions and large shapes. It's better to ignore any details when doing this, so that we can actually focus on the body as a whole, and not get lost in the details. To do this, start by gathering photo references and tracing simple geometric shapes over them. Once you understand how to do this, you can move on to draw by just looking at the reference and then drawing without tracing. Now we have a nicely proportioned and constructed body. The only thing that's left is to detail it with muscles, fat and skin. The important thing to remember when doing this is that we should still focus on big shapes, so that we won't be lost in drawing the tiny, nearly invisible details that the human body has. Focus on the big and recognizable muscles like the pectoralis major, the deltoids, the biceps and triceps. The big muscles are what gives the body its shape and are the ones that we will transform or just exaggerate to, well, exaggerate our character. Anatomy is a complex and deep subject with many things to learn. We can learn anatomy to its fullest and improve our understanding to the max, but that won't drastically increase the quality of our designs. Note, we should definitely learn all that we can, as it will still help us improve. Of course, we also need to learn how to pose a character in a meaningful way. Posing a character in a dynamic and meaningful way is probably the most difficult task for most artists. But what effect do poses have in relation to character design? Poses are what makes our character feel alive. In real life, no one stands perfectly idle. Everyone moves around, be it more subtly or more exaggerated. Through perspective and gesture, our character is put into a 3D environment as opposed to just floating in the void as a cardboard cutout. To do this effectively, we have to keep in mind that drawing the same pose over and over again will eventually become boring. Our characters will lose a significant aspect that creates interest. We can negate this by studying gesture. Gesture drawings are quick sketches of poses focusing mostly on the movement of the pose. When practicing gesture, we need to focus on using as few lines as we can to make an identifiable pose. When drawing gesture, try to ignore the details and really observe the pose as a whole before beginning to draw. Also, try to draw in as little time as possible, around 5 to 10 minutes should be enough. Start by finding the line of action in the pose. We use the line of action to visualize the movement of a pose. Once you found the line of action, continue by adding the secondary line of action. Not every pose has this, but for those that do. The secondary line of action is usually a leg or an arm that's branching off from the main line of action in a major way. So once we have our lines, we can start to add the volume of the body. I like to start with the upper body and then move on to the legs. This gives me a better understanding of the way a person is moving in 3D space. When posing any character, we need to keep the center of gravity in mind. Think about where the weight is focused in the pose and how the person is stabilized. As we get more advanced in our ability to draw gesture, we can add more details and definition to a pose. Lastly, one of the most important parts of posing our character is their silhouette. The pose plays a key part in how we perceive the silhouette. Because of the way our character is standing, their details and shape language could be muddled in the silhouette. One thing to remember is that if many parts of the body overlap or are located directly next to each other, the pose becomes a lot harder to read and the amount of visual clutter gets increased. The silhouette of our character isn't only defined by their pose, it is also defined by their shape language. Every character uses shapes to support their design. This goes for really cartoony characters as well as realistic ones. We want to know what these shapes do and how we can use them correctly. We can differentiate between 3 shapes: circles, squares and triangles. Circles convey comfort, friendliness and happiness. Squares are sturdy, reliable and confident, whilst triangles read as fast, dangerous and unpredictable. Shapes are like spices in a dish. They help with the flavor of our food. We use shapes to show information about our character. For example, a very triangular character is going to have more of an assertive and dominant feeling than a circular one. If we want to use shapes in character design, we just have to analyze the personality and story of our character and add shapes accordingly. So just like with spices, don't be afraid to combine some shapes. Maybe a friendly, round character can have hidden, sharp and triangular details to imply hidden danger, or vice versa. Aside from what shapes do for our design, how we should use them isn't very defined. We can use shapes however we want really. A shape can be the base of our entire character and everything else just builds on top of that singular shape. Or we can use shapes to give our character just that little extra bit of detail. There isn't really a defined way to practice shape language. Once we understand how these shapes impact our design, using them becomes more familiar with each drawing. My best advice for practicing shape language is to look at character designs you like and analyzing them to figure out what shapes were used in their design. You're probably sitting here right now thinking, well, that's a lot of things I have to keep in mind. And to that I say, yes, it's a lot. Character design is a complex subject with many things to learn, but that shouldn't stand in the way of your fun. Definitely take your time to study, but don't forget to just draw. Your art is not bound by the things you have to learn. If you take the time to study and to draw for fun, your art will improve. Don't be afraid of a few bad drawings. I hope this video was helpful for some of you. If it was and you enjoyed it, then that's great. Have a great time, have fun while drawing, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye bye!